So it's been 6 years since I've released music under my musical project Cull. I've never really talked in public or gone into any detail at all about this project except that it's dedicated to my Ba Noi, or in Vietnamese, paternal grandmother. Um, this project was born from perhaps the darkest period of my life so far. And well, I never really had the courage or motivation to share the story behind it, except in little bits here and there on my socials. And I think now, for my own sanity, I want to tell you guys why I do this and continue to do this. So, as a kid, I knew I wanted to be creative. And the first sign of this is when I failed a subtraction test in year three. My hands were always busy creating things. I had cracked copies of Macromedia, Adobe, and Cakewalk that helped give me like a sense of meaning and purpose. I grew up in Cherrybrook, which is like northwestish of Sydney, in a household with a typical Asian setup, where an elder, my grandmother, would be living in the home to support the kids as well as with domestic stuff. So my Benoit lived with me. She was my best friend. She was there when both my parents grinded it out working. When I was small and my parents would leave for work, the most comforting thing in the world was like clutching her leg as I watched them reverse out of the driveway. She would walk me to school and back, help me with school projects, fed, hugged me. We didn't have enough rooms in the house, so I shared a room with her until I was an adult and moved out. We were just like really close. When I picked up my first guitar at 12, she would often sit with me and read her papers while I fumbled around, like learning open chords. When I got to bar chords, she would hear me complain and whinge. When I started recording shit, she'd be the first to listen to things. And even though she didn't understand a word of it, she was my rock. And even though we had a little bit of a language barrier, I felt understood for the first time in my life. My parents worked hard and didn't have the capacity to be present in what would be like one of the most important facets of my life. I don't blame them. I mean, creativity typically isn't much of a priority amongst Asians, so I kind of made peace with that, I suppose. I knew from day one that music was going to be a huge part of my life, but I was also like pretty realistic about, knowing that it wasn't going to be my living. I found peace with that pretty early on. I just didn't want that to distract me from making stuff. But I wanted to sustain it with some sort of career, so I gravitated towards visual arts and graphic design because my hands and eyes didn't know how to do anything else. But one of my favorite moments with Benoit, which I repeat to everyone I meet, is when I had formed a band called Polar Nights with some of the most important people in my life. We had started making some merch, and I brought home a stack of stickers. My Benoit asked me, "What are these? Can I have some?" And so I gave her a stack of them. And at the time, I was doing a 3-hour commute each day to uni and work. One day I had come home and I was at my bus stop at Cherrybrook, and I was just walking home, and I couldn't help but notice that there were Polar Night stickers on telephone poles and then lights leading home. I got home and my mum called me over to her, and she was like fuming. She was just like, "What are all these stickers doing all over the house?" I could see Benoit in the background giggling to herself. She had stuck stickers all over the house, in the garage door, living room, my door, her closet. Like, she we just nodded at each other in recognition of her efforts. It was just It was bliss. Fast forward to 2012. I was working as a designer for a festival promoter called Fuzzy Events. I got a phone call from my dad, and he asked me to come home because he had some important news for me. When I got home, he shared it pretty briefly and bluntly. Benoit had developed an aggressive blood cancer, and she had 3 months at best. He told me she would be susceptible to infection and germs and all of that. I remember just standing there, not even digesting this information. I raced to my local Woolies and I just emptied every cent in my bank, like to buy disinfectants and like cleaning shit, and in a kind of hopeless effort to maybe extend her time. And yeah. But the thing that made this particular period of my life deeply painful was the approach that our family had chosen to process what little time we had with her. My parents are traditional Buddhists, and with that comes specific ways to deal with grief and impending loss of a family member. So, in Buddhism, one spends a life trying to release themselves from attachment, to hopefully achieve enlightenment and like nirvana, to assist with a clean like reincarnation into the afterlife. And if things from your former life pull at you, you'll find it harder to reincarnate and transfer like cleanly and successfully, you know. And my parents wanted my Benoit to release herself from this attachment to this world, and by limiting our contact and time with Benoit, and in my case, this was basically no contact. Being young and dealing with my first journey through grief, I respected my parents' wishes, but most of all, I believed them when they said that this would help assist my best friend to travel to whatever is next. And at the time, I didn't know this decision would fuck me up for years to come, you know. The time which Benoit had left seemed like a blur. Like, I remember my sister calling me up one evening while I was doing overtime at work, and she told me that this night was likely Benoit's last. She was set up in a hospice, like palliative care in Wahroonga. Amazing place. I don't know what came over me, but maybe I was overwhelmed by grief. I decided to defy my parents and sneak out to the hospice with my sister and her husband. And we got there together. It would have been close to 10 p.m. And in silence, we kind of like we got to the door to her room, and up until this point, like, my last memory of Benoit was laying next to her on her bed in her room back home. It was a sunny arvo. The skies were blue as fuck, man, and I could hear the cheers and screams of kids like playing footy at a Greenway Oval, just down the road from me, and I was listening to something on my MP3 player, and she was listening to Viet radio, I think, and it was just a beautiful but mundane, everyday kind of like time for me. But what I saw in that hospice, my final memory of Benoit, was a nightmarish contrast to that sunny memory, you know. It was of a still body, faced away from us, being rolled around by a nurse because her body it could no longer like circulate blood in her body independently. And seeing this, I retreated to the room's bathroom and I fell to the knees, at the sink. I remember telling myself through gritted teeth, like, fucking, trade me, man, not like this, man. Take me instead, bro. Like, this is not her time. She'd gone through hell and back, and, during the Vietnam War, a single mum, like, feeding and managing a huge family while shells and rockets and flew over a house in Saigon, body parts scattered around the neighborhood. I remember looking up at the ceiling of that bathroom in desperation, appealing to any divine entity up there that if she would just make a slight independent movement, I will become a devout believer. The best kid out there. There's a line in one of my songs called Animate from the Benoit EP that talks about this very moment. It goes, I'm sitting waiting for pleasures like to see you animate. And when you're up again, I'll be the best kid that you've ever known. Whenever I sung that line live, I clutched the Benoit tattoo on my arm. It was fucked, man. And just like that, she was gone. And then the crippling guilt began. I needed to do something about this. I owed Benoit the world, a lifetime, and more for the time I didn't give to her in her last moments, in her last month or so. And the only way I knew was through music, man. I decided to create Cull and as an attempted antidote to this guilt. A little selfish, but I don't know what else to do. I still don't. I read a definition somewhere from the word cull as being the person or thing that is rejected or set aside as inferior in quality. I thought this was pretty good for what I needed to do with the project. I wanted to set aside the inferior feelings of guilt I was feeling into this project so that my IRL could move on. It helped mitigate the self-harm and substance abuse. It kept me busy. It gave me purpose. And you know what? Like, my depression hates that shit. So that was nice. I took a long break from music, about 6 years. I was getting hit pretty hard by repeated mental health crises. I was self-harming again. COVID hit and I couldn't afford therapy. I also just needed to survive. Music wasn't a career. It probably never will be. So I had to laser focus on bringing in the cash and design, animation, and 3D art. Grinding in that arena helped sustain my survival. And so I poured every waking second into the craft. At the cost of my social life, at the cost of my family life, and sometimes at the cost of Rivers, my dog. I became a scholar of the heavier genres, and I never stopped studying and producing music in this time. I have dozens, if not hundreds, of unreleased demos. I wrote 3 unreleased albums in the time, but I just never had the courage to release anything until a few months ago. So my dad got really sick, and he's scheduled to go into major heart surgery in less than a month. Um, about 2 months ago, I took my dad out to Royal North Shore Hospital and spent the day there freelancing and waiting for my dad to do some tests. When you're in that environment, you can't help but think how much grief passes through its doors. And it got me thinking, if he's on his way out, I'm not going to go down the same path I did before when dealing with potential loss. You know, I'm not avoiding him. I'm going to make this time count. So I'm releasing 2 songs from the album I've titled I've Lost You to the Fog of War. In gaming and I guess military tactics, what this means is like the fog of war is like the darkness or the unknown area that you need to reveal in an RTS like AoE or StarCraft. For me, that fog has been my depression, and I've been actively losing myself to it. Things have been better, but the fight is still there, and the music I write helps me navigate it. I'll go into more detail with like what each song means. But for now, they're up on all the major channels. For old fans of Cull, thank you for being you, for exploring and connecting with this area of my creativity. It's been such a pleasure to heal together with you. You know who you are. And for new ones, welcome, and I look forward to telling you more about this madness. Fuck, I hate speaking to the camera. This is wacky ass. Anyway, cheers.